That's the reason why I became a filmmaker, because we saw other people telling our stories and it not right, you know. They just mess it up or tear it apart and just they put their own twist into what they think is local or Hawaiian and just kind of butcher everything. So with the medium and how much it's changed and made it more accessible for us, it's given us the ability to give us the voice and put the power within our hands, and that's been what I've been kind of stressing throughout my films.
The vision of young Hawaii filmmaker Ty Sanga, next on Long Story Short.
Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox is Hawaii's first weekly television program produced and broadcast in high definition.
Aloha mai kākou, I'm Leslie Wilcox. The Sundance Film Festival, the nation's preeminent showcase for independent filmmakers, recognized Hawaii filmmaker Ty Sanga in January of 2011. His film short, Stones, became the first all-Hawaiian language film to be screened at the festival. Ty, along with his brother, was raised in Hawaii by a family whose heritage reflects our community's ethnic diversity. His mother, Trinidad, is a first-generation immigrant of Filipino ancestry. His late father, Gilbert, was of Hawaiian Chinese descent. Lauded for his use of the camera and his ability to convey the Hawaiian experience through the medium of film, Ty Sanga's quest to find his calling started by knocking on doors to make hotel room service deliveries.
We lived in like Half-Tailing, Kalihi area, and my mom and dad constantly worked quite a bit. I mean, a lot. They're both working in the hotels, just my aunt. So many times me and my brother, like whenever they would work and it would be holidays, we'd be sent up to the mainland where my mom's family is. So we kind of lived this like dual life of Hawaii and LA, and like just that experience of what California was like. Well, it rose my awareness to what local is, because my cousins, a lot of times they would tell me I speak way too much Pidgin. And I never really understood what Pidgin was until they exposed me that we're not really speaking English. To be honest, I never knew I was even speaking, quote, a different dialect or a different language. I mean, I thought I was just speaking English. On my mom's side, everyone's second generation Filipino. So when they moved up to LA, they're pretty much more assimilated into American culture. I mean, they actually gravitated more towards Mexican culture because there was no other Asians that looked like them. And many times my cousins, and they're very strong-willed too, and they're very like this is how we should act as Americans. And only until like I got into college or past that, especially when I got exposed to ethnic studies, I started realizing like the differences within our cultures, and then how much I represented more of a quote-unquote local culture than a mainland culture. Most of that actually happened, that prejudice happened when I was in college, when I went to when I went for my master's program in Chapman University.
What happened?
Well, pretty much every year on the dot, like I would get pulled over by a cop, and they would always confuse me as some like Latino guy. Well, I don't know what it was. I guess because back in the days my head was shaved bald too, and so that didn't really help. But yeah, I got pulled over quite a bit. Like I'd be walking to school, and my school is in Chapman University, so this is a very conservative white community, which is in the Orange County. And that first year, I'd walk to school quite a bit because I didn't have a car yet. And the cop car would go around the block, come back again, and stop up right next to me, and he'd be like, "What are you doing?" And I would tell him I'm going to college. I mean, I'm going to walk into my school, and he's like, "Let me see your ID." And he'd just give me the run around, and then he'd just drive off, and that'd be it. Every year, it'd be the same thing, too, because sometimes the next year, I'd work, like, when working on film, you're working on it, like, for long hours, and sometimes I would come home at, like, 3 in the morning, so I'd leave school at 3 in the morning, and I'd get pulled over, and then he would run my license plate and everything, too, and the same questions as well, like, what are you doing now? Why are you driving around? What do you do? And it's just like, what's going on? Stuff like that never happened to me here in Hawaii. But now then when I moved to the mainland, I realized that there's this divide of like, I mean, I've never been exposed to something like that. I've always read about it when I was studying ethnic studies, but I've never been actually exposed to that type of prejudice, you know.
Filmmaker Ty Sanga's parents shared their values of hard work and education by demonstrating their strong work ethic and by using their hard-earned wages for their son's private schooling. His father impressed upon Ty the importance of his Hawaiian heritage. When Ty was an 8th grader, his father died of an illness. His mother continued to provide for her children's educational opportunities.
And that's the reason why she always pushed about us, just in regards to just education in itself and like how it helped propel you within the society and within life. Especially because I think her highest was high school, and that was it. And she went straight into a service-oriented jobs, you know, working in hotels. But from there, she worked her way out to the top. But then she didn't want us to go through that type of struggles as well, you know. So me and my brother went through.
Was it a real scrimping, saving thing to put you and your brother through private school?
Yes, it was. I mean, it was. I don't. The beautiful thing, and I think that's the thing about first generations too. Like those type of parents that they don't want to let their children know how much they have to sacrifice for it, because they want. The reason why they come to America is they want a better life for their children. So when that happens, which is almost like a negative effect to it to an extent, is that they never expose them to all the hard work and like what they have to go through sometimes. And that's the reason why some of the children of them feel so privileged that they demand these type of things. And why isn't my mom giving me all this type of stuff when we've been always having that since we were children? So it's interesting that my mom tried to like, they quote unquote spoil us. But like, I think my dad and my guys kind of kept us really grounded in that sense of like who we were and like, what we needed to do. And then like, that he also, I think that's what I love my dad about, because then like he never like, he instilled that really hard work too on top of that. Like,
and he was also in hotel business, right?
Yeah, he was. It's funny because then he was actually the manager of my mom. I think that's how they first met, and he ended up going into engineering because then he switched positions afterwards. And then my mom ended up rising up into manager. But it never, like I always saw it all the time that they constantly worked a lot, and I appreciated it quite a bit, because then it's not like we're like latchkey children, but then like I understood what they were doing. I don't know, it was just kind of a weird thing to say, like I understood the sacrifices they were making for us. So.
You went through 3 Catholic private schools before getting to UH, and when you're in UH, did you have a sense of where you were going? I mean, usually the first 2 years are deciding on a major. How'd you do there as far as deciding?
I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I definitely knew I didn't want to start working right away. So I mean, like school was the easy transition. And when I went to school, it was, I think I first started in ICS.
ICS is?
Computer science. I loved computers a lot back then. And then I realized like, wow, I don't really like doing math. So. But then, which is funny, because my next transition from there was business, which is like another version of that. And in that, I just lost interest in. I mean, but it just felt like every one of my friends was going into business too, and it just seemed like that's what you needed to do, because then everyone wanted to be successful, and then that didn't go so well. And then I went to hotel management, and that's kind of where I ended up settling for a bit, actually, because then while I was going into TIM, I started working at Ihilani, and then that's. So it's almost like a circle where like my mom and my dad and my aunts, them all worked in hotels. Then I started working in hotels at the same time as well. It just felt like a natural progression actually for me. I realized like if I was gonna work so much at something for so long, I would rather have it something a little bit more meaningful for me. I mean, I love the hotel industry, and especially since like for me, I saw it as a way to become an ambassador to other to cultures that have never been exposed to Hawaii. Because when I was in room service, like a lot of the times we had easy access with the guests, and we talked to them frequently while we were serving them or while we're doing certain things, and then they would ask us all these different questions of like, where do I go from here, and like how do I say this, kalani ane ole, you know, all of these different things. So it felt nice, you know, but it didn't feel worthwhile. And then so like I just started going back to school, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do still back then. So I just started like focusing more of my, like I still didn't want to, I was still taking TIM courses, but I was signing up mostly for ethnic study courses. So I think at the same time, with ethnic studies, I was doing literature as well.
So we're just following what you were interested in. You didn't have a grand plan.
No, I mean, because by that point I was already in college for like 4 years, I think. And the reason why I started taking a lot of ethnic studies is because I did a lot. They focus more on, what was the word term? Social services. Because then, like, when I was a high school student, like I used to volunteer quite a bit actually with American Red Cross, with all these youth environmental programs. So then it kind of fit more along the lines of what I wanted to do, actually.
You were looking at some of the more marginalized people in society too, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's because it finally like opened my eyes in regards to like who we were as a culture and as a society. I mean, I always felt strongly about being proud to be from Hawaii. They justified it through ethnic studies and even through like my literature classes, because then I took this course it was a short stories course by Mike Puliloa, and he introduced us to like a lot of like local short stories, and and that's where I found this like Chris McKinney and Loisan Yamanaka and like Lee Tanauchi, and then like everything that my mom them was saying and everything that my cousins them were saying in the mainland, that you should get rid of that like local culture because you need to be more American and stop speaking pidgin. And then these writers and these ethnic studies courses made us proud to be who we were, and be respected for it too. Like especially like Chris McKinney and Lee Tanauchi, they demanded to be respected for being local, you know, and demanded to be respected for speaking pidgin. So it just blew my mind, and then I just started like diving in more into those type of things, and then through ethnic studies, I got introduced to documentaries. A lot of it is like the Makoka Aina stuff, which is it dealt with a lot of like the land issues and people getting displaced, from, like Hawaiians getting displaced from their lands. Powerful images with like Hawaiians getting arrested and crying and getting like locked into cars, and just like, and then just like they're destroying their buildings, and and it's so funny because then like I can't even pinpoint what the docs were called, but it just hit me so strongly. And then like next week we'd watch another documentary in another course where I think like John Okumura would show us like Asian Americans fighting alongside of African Americans during like the Black Power movement, and how like our cultures were moving on the same trajectory as them, as just wanting to get acceptance. And like it blew my mind knowing that, like, because we grew up knowing like how powerful the African American movement was, but then realizing that Asians were a part of that movement as well, and how much that they try to accomplish within their, just in regards to acceptance. Like I was never exposed to that growing up. I mean, we were never exposed to that at all, actually, in Hawaii, nonetheless, where we're considered the majority. It was a huge effect into who I was as a filmmaker, because then they started giving me the realization that we have a stronger voice that no one else has ever heard.
The University of Hawaii's Academy for Creative Media provided Ty Sanga with hands-on experience in filmmaking. He produced several award-winning short narrative films that reveal a social awareness nurtured through his ethnic studies experience and a keen eye for the nuances of local culture.
I got into film because of documentaries, but then I've never made a doc since then, I think. I think the first assignment I did was this piece called Passive Voice, and it dealt with the connection between this older generation and the younger generations and the responsibilities that we need to give for the older generations.
I love the title, Passive Voice.
Yeah, and especially because in our Asian culture, we're very it's very passive aggressive sometimes, and you never say anything, but you know something's brewing within it, you know. So that generation, and like so much, they've sacrificed so much for us to exist, that it's sad sometimes when people like kind of toss them off to the side. I mean, like, dude, the reason why we're here is because of them. So that story, Passive Voice, was kind of like my nice little homage to them. They're just two characters, a granddaughter and then a grandmother, but the granddaughter's like, she's in college, you know, so the whole entire story is about her, just her responsibility to go home and go over at grandma's house and take care of her. And then like the whole story is just about realizing how important that was in regards to connecting with your elderlies, and just like, I don't know, I was just dealing with these different types of themes back then. I was trying to do interesting things in regards, I was inspired by different filmmakers in that, like the Wong Kar-wai technique. And I didn't really know what I was doing about it, but I was just like, all right, I want to just explore and test things out. And like, thankfully, I think it won actually at the Oloro Youth Exchange, where everyone else is doing all these flashy, like, one thug beating up another thug and stealing goods, and it's like
Action.
yeah, Tarantino-esque, and I guess I was dealing with drama stuff and like emotional local stuff.
How flexible were you if things didn't go your way?
You know what you want, but then sometimes certain limitations show you that you can't achieve it. So you still ultimately try to achieve your goal, and you try to work around it or work within the problem. Because like usually any limitation is just an opportunity for more creativity, you know.
What was your next film?
We all had to pitch stories, and then that was a story that I knew because I worked in the hotel industry, but I associated it with like a hula girl coming from the Big Island, moving to Hawaii. Just that thin line of like what is considered as commercialization versus like what is considered like culturally acceptance, and like, yeah, and like being true to your culture and being commercialized.
A lot is left unsaid, but it's understood.
Yeah, I think I forced things too much back then because it was definitely, I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely like, it was derivative of my ethnic studies courses where I wanted to impact people as much as those films impacted me. So I think sometimes I try to be, we call it Meta 5 at Chapman, which is like it's bigger than a metaphor. You know, you're hitting you're hitting the audience over the head when it shouldn't need to be anymore by that point, because like you said, it is understood.
You know what it reminded me of? I have to share this with you because Malcolm Naea Chun shared it with me. It's a quote from Mary Kavena Pukui, and she said, "Do you believe I'm wearing a kukui lei? It's Hawaiian in looks. It's plastic made in Hong Kong. That's what's become of a lot of our beliefs."
Yeah, the commercialization of our culture. And I'm super grateful I went through that process of making this film, because then it also opened my eyes to the complexity in regards to our society of like how much, I mean, even the other older generations grew up living like hapahauli, hula, and being a part of that society too, you know. I mean, like it's to be honest, it's derivative of who we are today as Hawaiians, practically. I mean, many of those things you can't really pull apart because like it's almost connected. And then like if we say you get rid of like all of the stuff in the luau's and everything like that, you're practically saying that you're losing everyone their jobs as well as a Hawaiian, you know. So, and it's so weird because in so many of them they dance hula within the luau's, but yet at the same time they go to halau's on the weekends, you know. So it's this two worlds that they live on. And it's interesting, as a filmmaker, I didn't really find that until I started digging deeper and exploring it. And I think that's the beauty of me becoming a filmmaker now, because then you start discovering things that I've never been exposed to. I mean, and I wouldn't have been on that journey unless I started it, you know, like, I mean, finding these things out unless I went on this journey. So yeah.
So did you resolve after that one, I'm going to be less preachy?
Yes, definitely. I mean, like, you learn to finesse things, and you learn to like, how do you convince the audience about what this culture, I mean, what your story is going to be about, and not be hitting them over the head, and like, it's that like putting that little sugar into the medicine that they're going to taste, you know, and how it's going to, because once you get to that point, and how is it going to resonate with them afterwards, you know, because then once, yeah, so it's a balancing act, and I guess I'm still trying to deal with it today, and then, yeah. Follow Leaders deals with like acceptance. Actually, it's more about acceptance and friendship, and also prejudice within our culture and our society of like local culture. When I went to St. Teresa and St. Anthony's, we used to collect a lot of basketball cards growing up. And I use that as a parallel too in regards to like basketball, and like especially back then in the 90s. Like the white players weren't the great basketball players, and the like, you know, Michael Jordans and all those guys are all the main. But then it was these were the stereotypes that we knew, and then that story dealt with stereotypes as well. It's about finding a companionship between two kids that just wanted to be accepted within their little group that existed in their little microcosm of this basketball collecting world. And so, yeah.
You know, you have such a good ear, because I never collected baseball cards, never was in that mom and pop store but I feel like I've been there. I feel like I've bought from that very same lady who was at the counter.
I mean, all my movies come from my everyday life, or from what I've experienced. I wanted to film in the actual store that we used to collect basketball cards in, and that store was gone. It was just like, it's just like another form of like why I tell stories, because like all of our stories are going to disappear.
After earning a bachelor's degree in ethnic studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Ty Sanga left for California to attend graduate school at Chapman University's Film and Media Arts program. For his graduate thesis, he chose to write and direct a story loosely based on the Hawaiian legend Nakeki o Na'iwi, as written by Frederick Bruce Wickman. It depicts a couple who are the last of the ancient Mu people, living in isolation and struggling with whether to accept newcomers. It was this film, titled Stones, that brought him back to the islands, accompanied by a contingent of Chapman students to shoot the film on location.
There's always those stories of like the people that go to the mainland and they never come back, or they go to the mainland and they fail at it. You know, I mean, like a lot of my friends actually went to graduate school or even just undergrad, and they go to the mainland and be like, I get homesick, I miss Hawaii so much, I'm gonna go back. A lot of my heart was in Hawaii, that when I went to the mainland, I didn't want that to happen to me, so I kind of closed that door. So maybe I almost slammed that door. So when it was time for me to do my thesis film, like, that story just haunted me every night, actually, because then it reminded me of like the whole, just my whole experience as wanting to be a filmmaker.
Wanting something that you thought you might not be able to have?
Yeah, well, even just in regards to Hawaii, because it's like, because I missed it so much. And then I guess it's one of those things. So hence I changed the legend quite a bit. I mean, we adapted the legend. I mean, I called Buddy Wickman and we talked stories with him, and I adapted it more into a different version.
This is the Mr. Wickman who lives on Kauai and who's written books on legends. He's considered just a wonderful expert.
Yeah, yeah.
And was this a Kauai-based legend?
Yeah, it's a Kauai. It's the legend where when you're heading out to Kalalau, then you see the stones out there. Oh. So yeah, it's the stone pillars, and then that's when you know when you're heading into Kalalau, because when you see those. I wanted it to be kind of my story of my struggles of what I was dealing with during that time, actually, so the story is really, really different, actually. The only thing that's the same is the sacrifice that gets made at the end of the movie. Definitely it's about love, and then loss of love, and then sacrifice. At the same time, too, it deals with cultures colliding. And it's all about acceptance and being like, just separation. Because then, like, many of the times, like, they're the Mu that lives in the valleys, and then they shun themselves away from visitors coming to the island. Actually, just moving into the island. Because a lot of the stories that we found, and it's so interesting when I was doing my research, is just like many of the legends are about the Mu migrating away from Hawaii. So we got pieces and pieces from there, bits and pieces from there, and then I definitely try to so I wanted to make sure that this is my own personal story.
Waikeo, Ike mea, Ikeala.
Our main character is the female, Nihipali, where she living in the darkness, and then like through this journey she kind of becomes enlightened. And it's so funny that all of the antagonists are all male characters, even for the villager side. The fathers, and her husband, they impose this kind of like closed-minded roles onto them, the females. On the flip side, like the light becomes like like death. That when the sun comes up, it's death for them. And for her, so the whole entire her life would be in a dark world, yet she's able to see everything. So we wanted the audience to be we played with different techniques. One of our biggest influences was Pan's Labyrinth and how they mess around with colors and lighting, and because it also deals with the fantasy world and the reality, and then that was another way for us, for a Western audience to understand what kind of story we're telling. When you close yourself off for so long, you lose what really is important in your lives, And for him, he was just so very one-sided and narrow-minded. And then for the wife, she's willing to move on and move forward. And sometimes if you stay stagnant, it's almost like it's another form of extinction, and then that's what ends up becoming. So yeah, so it's a tragedy. I'm not gonna lie, the story is a tragedy, but it hopefully has hopeful messages within it. Yeah, I definitely think my first biggest responsibility is to make it specifically for Hawaii, but then like when I do that, like I mean, I already know it becomes universal for everywhere else. And it's because of what you talked about, also because of making it very like three-dimensional, and because of just digging deeper into things and not making things so surface level, and talking about it up here, like just getting it so that everyone else understands from here, from Hawaii to like DC or Wisconsin or wherever they're from, it's gonna resonate that way. So, yeah.
Told with cinematic grace, Stones was one of only 81 entries chosen from 6,500 to be showcased at the Sundance Film Festival in 2011. In 2011, Ty Sanga teaches screenwriting at the Academy for Creative Media and works for a production company, all the while shaping stories for inspirational and thought-provoking films about and for Hawaii. Among his projects is a documentary in the works about Hawaiian community leader Myron Pinky Thompson. Mahalo piha, Ty Sanga, for sharing your long story short. And thank you for watching and supporting PBS Hawaii. I'm Leslie Wilcox. Ahui ho kako.
For audio and written transcripts of this program and all episodes of Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox, visit pbshawaii.org.
Especially when I was growing up, my mom never wanted me to. She wanted me to get rid of the pigeons. She wanted us to like wear our shoes, stop running around barefoot or slippers, start wearing nice collared shirts. So then it trained us like to we know when to turn it on and we know when to turn it off. Or actually, you just feel more comfortable in your environment. I think that's kind of where I learned. It's almost like survival skills. That when I get placed into an environment, I kind of adapt to that culture.